Hello guys, today I'll be talking about bands that I've got into in 2020. Now these bands are of course in no particular order or anything, but two of these bands are super groups and the rest of them are just normal or slash regular bands. But anyways, let's go ahead and dive into these bands. The first one I want to talk about is Dead by Sunrise. This is one of Chester's bands. He also had members of Orgy in the band too. They only released one album. It was called Out of Ashes, if I got the album title right. And overall, I think it's a pretty solid album. It does have a share of highlights like Fire, Let Down, and Crawl Back In, and My Suffering, just to name a few songs. I mean, I wouldn't say that I love the album, but I do like it though, and I would say that it is worth checking out, especially if you're a Linkin Park fan. But next band I want to talk about is Saint Sonia. This is also a supergroup. You have Adam Gontier, formerly of 3 Days Grace, and you also have a member of Stained in the band. But, I mean, I'm not a Stained fan, but I do think their guitarist is pretty decent, though. But with Saint Sonia, of course, when their first album came out, I did check it out, but I didn't like it enough to really become a fan. I mean, I had a few songs that I liked, but I wouldn't say that I really loved it enough to really, again, become a fan. But when Fall Design came out, I did listen to it, but same thing with this album. I liked a few songs, but didn't love it enough to become a fan. But then I gave the album another listen this year, and I really dug it this time. And of course, I went back and checked out the other album, their debut album, and liked it more now compared to when I first heard it. But of the two albums, I probably like Flawed Design more, but the debut, again, is still a solid album, but I just find myself enjoying Flawed Design a bit more. But overall, I think they're a pretty solid supergroup. But then we get to the band Filter, and of course, the lead singer is a former member of Nine Inch Nails, Robert Patrick. And overall, I think he's a pretty good singer. Now, ever since Crazy Eyes, I've kind of had mixed feelings about his overall vocal performance ever since that album and the stuff after. But either way, I still think Filter is a pretty solid band. I mean, I do think, well, kind of like with most people, I do think that their first three albums are the best. And I think the third album, The Amalgamate's kind of underrated, even though it's commonly referred as one of their best. I do find it kind of underrated because most people just talk about where do we go from here, but not so much the rest of the songs on the album. But some of my favorites from that album are, of course, Where Do We Go From Here, You Walk Away, The Only Way Is the Wrong Way, It Can Never Be the Same, and some others. But I think that album's pretty dang good. I really like the guitar tone on that album. I like the overall production of the album too. But Title of Record's probably my favorite album by Filter. Not a single weak song on it. And some people point to Short Bus as their best, but that album's in close second for me personally. I just find myself enjoying Title of Record a bit more. But Short Bus is definitely a great album though, and not a bad start for a band. But yeah, Filter, pretty good band. If you like a band like maybe Deftones, you'll probably enjoy Filter. So definitely check out Filter if you like Deftones. But anyways, next band, Life of Agony. And with this band, you kind of hear some alternative metal, you hear some groove metal, and maybe a little bit of hardcore. Each album is definitely different from the previous one, and I'll be honest, I really only like their 90s stuff. When it comes to the stuff from the 2000s and on, very hit or miss for me, to be honest. I only like a few songs. I mean, Love to Let You Down is a pretty solid song, and I think Scars is a pretty solid song too. But most of the stuff that they came out with after the 90s just doesn't really do much for me. But again, has a few highlights though, like the two songs that I mentioned. But River Runs Red, definitely a classic album, and of course song 2. You have classics like This Time and Through, and Bad Seed and Underground, but the deep cuts in that album are pretty dang good too, like The Stain Remains and Respect. Those are pretty good songs, but River Runs Red is just an excellent album all around. And same with the next album, Ugly. I really like that album. Definitely has kind of a dark atmosphere to it. When when you look into the making of that album, you can definitely understand or really see how the album ended up being the way it is when you look into the process of the album and how it was created and all that. But some of my favorites from that album are Seasons, Other Side of the River, Unstable, Don't You Forget About Me, and some others. Now the next album, Soul Searching Sun, that was an album that I kind of struggled with at first, but over time I grew to like it a bit more. I don't like it as much as the previous two albums, but I do think it's a solid album overall. You have some pretty solid songs on the album, like Weeds and Hope and My Mind is Dangerous. Desire is a pretty cool song too. But yeah, Life of Agony, definitely a band that's not afraid to mix things up, and overall I think they're a pretty solid band. But next we have the band Rammstein, and Rammstein, definitely a surprise for me because I always knew of the band. It's just for the longest time their music wasn't really for me, but I guess I gave them another chance this year and I really dug them this time, especially their debut, Herzeleid. I know I probably butchered that, but it's German for heartache. But yeah, that album and Mutter, which is German for mother, I believe. Those two albums are probably my favorites from the band. But yeah, Rammstein, definitely a unique band. I do like the industrial aspect of their sound too. And yeah, overall, a pretty cool, unique band. And I'm glad that I got into them too. But next we have the band Corrosion of Conformity. Started off as a kind of a crossover thrash type of band, a little bit of punk, I guess you could say, maybe. Eventually leading into more sludgy territory, southern rock, southern metal type of stuff. A mixture of styles, you could maybe say, but Blind is probably my favorite album by them. Most people point to Deliverance, but Blind is my personal favorite. I really like Carl's vocals on that album. But of course I do like Pepper Keenan's vocals, but I really like Carl's vocals too. I'm still not sure which vocalist I like more. Of course most people would probably pick Pepper, but I also really like Carl's vocals again on Blind. But yeah, Corrosion of Conformity, pretty good band. I wouldn't say that I like all their albums, but the albums that hit, they really do hit. But yeah, Corrosion of Conformity, again, pretty good band. But next we have the band Genesis. Genesis is, of course, one of the pioneers of the whole prog rock thing, or prog rock scene. And I actually got into them this month. I binged, listened to most of their material, and instantly became a fan. I got hooked on albums like A Trick for the Tail. I can't remember what it's called. It's the one that has the characters on the album cover of people just walking by. I can't remember what it's called. Something about a trick, but that one's one of my favorites. And I also really like The Invisible Touch and the self-titled album, Foxtrot. They have many solid albums. And of course, if you like prog rock, definitely check out Genesis. And finally, the last band, Grey Days. Now, I have heard their two albums that weren't, I guess, worldly known, I guess you could say, No Sun Today and Wake Me. I have heard those albums. I listened to them on YouTube, of course, and I think they're decent albums. And of course, I did hear the album that they released this year, Amends, which is, of course, reworked versions of songs from those two albums. And overall, I like the album. It's not one of my favorite albums of the year, but I do like it, though. But Grey Days does have their share of pretty solid songs like Sickness and In Time. Soul Song, I think, is a really good song, probably one of my favorites from the band. And of course, What's in the Eye is a really good song too. They have a number of pretty solid songs. Of course, I wouldn't go as far to say that they're like one of my favorite bands in the world or anything, but they are a band worth checking out. And if you're a Chester Bennington fan or a Linkin Park fan or Dead by Sunrise, definitely give this band a listen. Definitely give them a chance and give their album Amends a listen. But anyways, those are all the bands I got into today. Or no, not today, this year. Let me know your thoughts on these bands. Let me know what bands you got into this year and all that good stuff. But anyways, thanks for watching. Leave a comment to like, subscribe. Have a nice day and take care.